The Boeing 737 shuddered violently at 37,000 feet, throwing passengers against their seatbelts like rag dolls. Marcus Rivera clutched his daughter's hand tighter, watching her 8-year-old eyes fill with terror as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like yellow serpents. He was just another broke single dad in row 17, returning from his ex-wife's wedding with his custody weekend, cut short by her new husband's dismissive glare. The aircraft's engine screamed in mechanical agony before falling silent. In that deafening quiet, Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze, the unmistakable whistle of military jets approaching fast. Through the small oval window, he glimpsed the sleek gray silhouette of an F-22 Raptor pulling alongside, its pilot's helmet barely visible in the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain." The voice crackled through the intercom, strained but controlled. "We have experienced complete hydraulic failure. Emergency services are being coordinated, and we have military escort for our approach into Denver." Marcus had heard that tone before, in dusty forward operating bases, in the moments before everything went sideways. The captain was lying. This wasn't mechanical failure. The way the Raptor maintained perfect formation, the subtle hand signals the pilot was making through the canopy, the fact that more fighters were appearing on the horizon like deadly stars, this was something else entirely. A woman in first class turned around, her designer suit wrinkled, her face pale but determined. She was maybe 40, with the kind of controlled intensity that screamed military background. Her eyes met Marcus's across the cabin chaos, and she mouthed a single word that made his heart stop: hijack. But there were no hijackers, no screaming terrorists, no demands. Just a commercial airliner losing altitude over the Colorado Rockies, with fighter jets providing escort that looked more like a containment protocol. "Daddy, what's happening?" Isabella whispered, her small hand trembling in his. Marcus forced a smile he didn't feel. "Just some turbulence, Mija. Everything's going to be okay." The woman in first class was moving now, unbuckling her seatbelt despite the chaos. Flight attendants tried to stop her, but she moved with purpose, her eyes scanning faces like she was looking for someone specific. When her gaze found Marcus again, she nodded once, a recognition that chilled him to the bone. Because Marcus Rivera wasn't just a broke single dad. He wasn't just another passenger in coach, worried about making rent and disappointing his daughter again. 15 years ago, before Isabella was born, before the divorce and the desk job and the quiet desperation of civilian life, he had been someone else entirely. He had been Phantom 6, the best goddamn military pilot the Air Force had ever produced. And somehow, 37,000 feet above the Continental Divide, his past had finally caught up with him. The woman reached his row, her voice barely audible above the cabin noise. "Colonel Rivera," she whispered, and Marcus felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "My name is Victoria Thorne, CIA Tactical Operations. We need to talk." The 737 dropped another 1,000 feet, and through the window, Marcus could see Denver approaching like a sprawling circuit board against the earth. The F-22s maintained their formation, but now he noticed something else: a third aircraft, larger, more angular. A C-130 transport flying parallel, its cargo bay doors slightly open. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Isabella squeezed his hand tighter, and Marcus realized that in the next few minutes, he would have to choose between the man he'd become and the warrior he used to be. Between protecting his daughter's innocence and confronting the ghosts he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. The plane shuddered again, and Marcus Rivera closed his eyes, feeling Phantom 6 stirring in the depths of his memory like a caged predator finally sensing freedom. Outside, the Rockies stretched endlessly below, their peaks sharp as broken glass against the afternoon sky. Victoria Thorne slid into the empty seat beside Isabella without asking permission, her movements fluid despite the aircraft's violent shaking. She wore the kind of expensive perfume that couldn't quite mask the scent of cordite and steel wool, the smell of someone who'd been in firefights recently. "Isabella, right," she said to Marcus's daughter, her voice gentle but with an edge that suggested tactical training. "Pretty name. Spanish for beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus stiffened. "How do you know about your daughter? Same way I know about Kandahar, about Operation Nightfall, about the reason you disappeared from active duty in 2009 and never looked back." Victoria's eyes never left his face. "The agency has long memories, Marcus, especially for pilots who could thread an F-16 through a needle at Mach 2. The Boeing lurched again, losing more altitude. Through the intercom, the captain's voice returned, more strained now. "Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing procedures." But Victoria seemed unconcerned by their descent. She was focused entirely on Marcus, studying his face like she was reading classified documents. 12 years ago, you pulled off something that should have been impossible. Single-handedly prevented a nuclear device from reaching its target by flying a mission that killed 2 good pilots and should have killed you too. Isabella looked up at her father with wide eyes. "Daddy was a pilot." "The best," Victoria said, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. "Until he walked away. Until he decided being a hero wasn't worth the cost." Marcus felt the familiar weight in his chest, the guilt that had followed him through every job interview, every custody hearing, every night he'd lain awake listening to Isabella breathing in the next room. "That's ancient history." "Ancient history just hijacked Flight 447, Victoria said quietly. "Same signature, same electronic warfare patterns. Your old friend Dmitry Volkov didn't stay dead like we thought." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian arms dealer who'd been trafficking nuclear materials through Afghanistan until Marcus had intercepted his convoy in the Hindu Kush. The man who'd sworn vengeance in 3 languages as his compound burned around him. "Volkov died in that explosion," Marcus whispered. "Volkov faked his death in that explosion," Victoria corrected. "And now he's got control of this aircraft's flight systems. Remote access, full authority. The pilots up there," she gestured toward the cockpit. "They're passengers now just like us." Isabella tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, I'm scared." Marcus pulled his daughter closer, feeling the crushing weight of impossible choices. Outside, the F-22s were banking away, their escort mission apparently complete. In the distance, Denver International Airport grew larger, but they weren't heading for the runways. Their trajectory was taking them toward the city center. "What does he want?" Marcus asked. Victoria reached into her jacket, her movement careful and deliberate. When her hand emerged, she was holding a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. 20 minutes ago, every military installation within 100 miles received the same message. "Give me Phantom 6, or I turn Denver into a crater." The aircraft's engines changed pitch again, and Marcus realized they were in a controlled descent now, their altitude dropping steadily. Below, the sprawling metropolis of Denver filled the horizon, 2 million people going about their lives, unaware that death was approaching at 400 miles per hour. "He knows you're on this plane," Victoria continued. "Has known since you boarded in Phoenix. This whole thing, your ex-wife's wedding, the custody schedule change, even Isabella's seat assignment, it's all been orchestrated." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "You're telling me my daughter is bait?" "I'm telling you that Dmitry Volkov has spent 12 years planning his revenge, and he's willing to kill everyone in Denver to get it." Victoria's fingers moved across the device in her hand. "But there might be another way." The aircraft shuddered again, and somewhere in the cabin, a woman started crying. The sound mixed with Isabella's frightened breathing and the distant whine of jet engines, creating a symphony of desperation that Marcus recognized from countless combat missions. But this time, his daughter was in the crosshairs. Through the window, Marcus could see downtown Denver approaching like a concrete reef, its skyscrapers reaching toward their descending aircraft with glass fingers. Somewhere down there, people were having lunch, attending meetings, living their normal Wednesday lives. In 18 minutes, if Victoria was right, all of that would end in nuclear fire. Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the CIA operative who'd materialized out of his worst nightmares. Outside, the Colorado sky stretched endlessly blue, the same color as the day he'd first learned to fly, the same color as the day he'd walked away from it all. Now the sky was calling him back. "What do you need me to do?" Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "What you do best, Colonel, fly." She handed him the device, and Marcus saw that it wasn't a phone at all. It was a flight controller, military grade, with encrypted channels already open. On its screen, telemetry data scrolled past in green text, showing the 737's position, altitude, and trajectory. "Volkov's controlling the aircraft remotely from somewhere in the Denver metro area," Victoria explained, raising her voice as the cabin noise increased. "But his signal has to be transmitted through commercial cell towers. If we can triangulate his position and interrupt the transmission even for 60 seconds, the pilots can regain manual control." Marcus studied the device, his fingers automatically finding the familiar controls. It had been 15 years since he'd held military hardware, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. How do we interrupt a signal we can't locate? "We don't interrupt it," Victoria said. "We overload it." She reached into her other jacket pocket and produced something that made Marcus's breath catch. It was a flight helmet, matte black with the distinctive profile of Air Force Special Operations. On the side, barely visible, was a small decal he recognized, the Phantom Squadron insignia. "This aircraft has auxiliary controls in the cargo bay," Victoria continued. "Manual override systems that most passengers don't know exist, but accessing them requires someone who knows how to fly under combat conditions." The 737 banked sharply left, and through the windows, Marcus could see they were now following the South Platte River toward downtown Denver. Below, traffic moved along I-25 like ants on a highway, oblivious to the death approaching from above. "Victoria," Marcus said carefully, "this is a commercial airliner, not a fighter jet. Even if I can access the auxiliary controls, I can't outfly a remote system from inside the cargo bay." "You can if you're not trying to outfly it," she replied. "You just need to create enough electromagnetic interference to disrupt Volkov's signal for 90 seconds, long enough for Captain Morrison up there to regain control and execute emergency landing procedures." Isabella was watching their conversation with the intensity that only children possess, picking up on the adult tension even if she didn't understand the words. "Daddy, are we going to crash?" Marcus cupped his daughter's face with hands that had once guided multi-million-dollar aircraft through enemy fire. "No, Mija, we're going to land safely. I promise." But even as he said the words, Marcus knew he might be making a promise he couldn't keep. The device in his hands showed their altitude dropping steadily, 22,000 feet and descending. At their current rate, they had maybe 12 minutes before whatever Volkov had planned would come to pass. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly, leaning closer so Isabella couldn't hear. "The electromagnetic pulse required to disrupt his signal, it has to be generated from inside the aircraft, close proximity to the control systems." Marcus understood immediately. "You're talking about a localized EMP. That would fry every electronic system on the plane, including life support, including communications, including the auxiliary controls themselves." Victoria's eyes were steady, professional. "It's a one-shot option, Marcus. Once you trigger it, you'll have maybe 90 seconds to manually guide this aircraft to the ground before everything goes dark." The weight of it hit him like a physical blow. She was asking him to essentially crash land a commercial airliner by feel, with no instruments, no communications, and 200 souls depending on his ability to remember skills he hadn't used in over a decade. And if I can't? Victoria didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Through the windows, Denver continued to grow larger, its downtown district spreading below them like a target painted on the earth. Marcus looked at Isabella again, memorizing her face, the way her dark hair fell across her cheek, the trust in her eyes that he'd spent 8 years trying to deserve. Then he looked at the flight helmet in his hands, feeling the weight of who he used to be. Phantom 6 was stirring, and Denver was running out of time. Marcus strapped the helmet to his chest and stood up, ignoring the protests of nearby passengers. Through the cabin windows, he could see downtown Denver growing larger by the minute, its glass towers reflecting the afternoon sun like mirrors. Somewhere down there, Dmitry Volkov was orchestrating the final act of a 12-year vendetta. "Isabella, I need you to stay with Victoria," Marcus said, crouching beside his daughter's seat. "She's going to keep you safe while Daddy goes to help the pilots." Isabella's grip on his hand tightened. "I want to come with you." "I know, Mija, but this is grown-up work. Remember what I always tell you about being brave." "That being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Isabella recited, her voice small but steady. "It means you do what's right even when you're scared." Marcus felt his heart break a little. That's right. And right now, the right thing is for Daddy to go help everyone get home safely. Victoria was already moving, unbuckling Isabella and sliding into Marcus's seat. "I'll watch her," she said quietly. "Go save us all, Phantom 6. The use of his old call sign sent electricity through Marcus's nervous system. As he moved toward the back of the aircraft, he felt 15 years of civilian identity falling away like shed skin. His posture changed, his awareness sharpened, his movements became more fluid and purposeful. The cargo bay access was behind the rear lavatories, concealed by a panel that looked like part of the aircraft's interior design. Marcus found the manual release, a knowledge that came back to him from counterterrorism training he'd hoped never to use, and dropped into the aircraft's belly. The cargo bay was dim, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in red shadows. The auxiliary flight controls were exactly where Victoria had said they'd be. A compact console mounted near the aircraft's center of gravity, with manual cable connections to the primary flight surfaces. Marcus pulled on the helmet and immediately felt the familiar embrace of military electronics coming online. The heads-up display flickered to life, showing aircraft status, altitude, and heading. But more importantly, it showed him what Victoria's device had detected: electromagnetic signatures consistent with remote flight control systems. Volkov's signal was strong, coming from multiple transmission points around Denver. The bastard had set up a network, ensuring that losing any single transmitter wouldn't break his control of the aircraft. It was elegant, thorough, and exactly the kind of preparation Marcus would have expected from a man who'd spent 12 years planning his revenge. "Ghost Rider, this is Phantom 6, Marcus whispered into the helmet's communication system, using protocols he'd memorized 2 decades ago. "Do you copy?" Static, then impossibly a familiar voice crackled through the comm. "Phantom 6, Ghost Rider. Jesus Christ, Marcus, is that really you?" Colonel James, Ghost Rider, Patterson had been Marcus's squadron leader in Afghanistan. The fact that he was on frequency meant the military had been monitoring this situation from the beginning. "Affirmative, Ghost Rider. I'm aboard the hijacked aircraft, approximately 11 minutes from impact. What's our tactical situation?" "Nightmare Scenario 6. Target aircraft is being guided toward the federal building downtown. We've got F-22s providing overwatch but no clear shot. Too many civilians, too much risk of debris." Marcus's fingers found the auxiliary controls, feeling the mechanical resistance of cables and pulleys that connected directly to the aircraft's control surfaces. The system was backup of backup, designed to work even if every electronic component on the plane failed. "I'm going to attempt electromagnetic disruption of the control signal," Marcus reported. "But I'll need manual flight control for approximately 90 seconds while the aircraft's systems reset." A pause, then. "Marcus, you haven't flown anything in 15 years. 12 years, 7 months, and 16 days, Marcus corrected. "But who's counting?" Through the cargo bay's small porthole, he could see the Denver skyline approaching. They were maybe 8 minutes out now, their altitude dropping below 15,000 feet. At this rate and trajectory, they would impact somewhere in the heart of downtown, probably taking out several city blocks in the process. Marcus found the EMP device Victoria had mentioned, a gray box about the size of a laptop battery, with a simple arming switch and a red trigger button. Military simplicity at its finest. "Phantom 6, be advised," Ghost Rider's voice crackled through the comm. "We've identified the source of the remote signal. Volkov is transmitting from a mobile platform, probably a truck or van. He's moving through downtown Denver, staying ahead of our intercept teams." "Understood. Initiating electromagnetic pulse in 60 seconds." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the aircraft's motion through the soles of his feet. The 737 was a stable platform, designed for passenger comfort rather than combat maneuverability. But at its core, it was still an aircraft, still subject to the fundamental laws of physics that governed flight. He thought about Isabella, strapped into her seat 3 rows behind first class, trusting him to bring her home safely. He thought about the 2 million people below, going about their Wednesday afternoon, unaware that their lives hung in the balance. Most of all, he thought about the last time he'd been in this situation, 12 years ago, over the Hindu Kush, when stopping Dmitry Volkov's convoy had cost the lives of 2 good pilots and nearly killed Marcus himself. This time, he wasn't going to let anyone else pay the price for his choices. Ghost Rider Phantom 6, arming EMP device now. His finger found the arming switch, and immediately the heads-up display began showing electromagnetic readings spike. The device was building charge, preparing to release a pulse that would temporarily disable every electronic system within a 100-foot radius, including the life support systems, keeping 200 passengers alive at 15,000 feet. "Electromagnetic pulse in 10 seconds, Marcus announced. "All stations, prepare for communications blackout." He gripped the auxiliary flight controls with both hands, feeling the weight of the aircraft transmitted through steel cables and mechanical linkages. Outside, Denver filled his field of view like a concrete ocean. 5 seconds. Marcus thought about his daughter's face, about the trust in her eyes. 3, 2, 1. He pressed the trigger. The world exploded into darkness and silence. Every light in the cargo bay died instantly. The heads-up display went black, the communication system fell silent, and the only sound was the sudden mechanical groaning of an aircraft that had just lost every electronic system keeping it airborne. In the absolute darkness, Marcus felt the 737 begin to drop like a stone. His hands moved by instinct, pulling back on the auxiliary controls, feeling through steel cables for the aircraft's response. The nose came up slightly, not enough, but something. He could feel the airframe shuddering around him, could sense through minute vibrations that they were still losing altitude too quickly. Without instruments, without communications, without any reference point except the forces transmitted through mechanical linkages, Marcus had to fly a commercial airliner by feel alone. The emergency lighting flickered back on after 30 seconds, backup systems designed to survive electromagnetic pulses. In the red glow, Marcus could see the auxiliary controls responding to his inputs, cables moving as he adjusted elevator trim and aileron position. Through the small porthole, Denver was rushing up to meet them. He could see individual buildings now, could make out cars moving along streets that looked like circuit board traces. They were still too steep, still too fast. Marcus pulled harder on the controls, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly. The 737 wasn't designed for dramatic maneuvers, but it was responding to his inputs. Nose coming up, descent rate decreasing slightly. But it might not be enough. At 60 seconds, the aircraft's primary systems began coming back online. Marcus heard the distinctive whine of electronics rebooting, saw status lights beginning to flicker throughout the cargo bay. The electromagnetic pulse had done its job. Whatever signal Volkov had been using to control the aircraft was broken, at least temporarily. Through the comm system, he heard Captain Morrison's voice, strained but professional. "What the hell happened? I've got control again." "Captain Morrison, this is Colonel Rivera in the cargo bay," Marcus called through the emergency intercom. "I've disrupted the hijack signal, but you've got maybe 30 seconds before it reestablishes. You need to get us on the ground now." "Cargo bay, who is this? How did you—" "There's no time for explanations," Marcus cut him off. "Denver International is 12 miles northeast. Can you make it?" A pause while Morrison assessed their situation. Through the porthole, Marcus could see they were still descending toward downtown, but their angle was shallower now, their speed more controlled. "Negative," Morrison finally replied. "We're too low, too far out. I need an alternative." Marcus closed his eyes, visualizing the Denver area from memory. Stapleton Airport had been decommissioned, but the runways might still be intact. There was Centennial Airport to the south, but they'd never make the distance. Then he remembered something from his pre-flight briefing 15 years ago. Emergency protocols for civilian aircraft in distress. "Captain, there's a highway, I-76 running northwest out of the city. 4 lanes, relatively straight for about 6 miles. You want me to land a 737 on an interstate?" "I want you to save 200 lives," Marcus replied. "Your choice." The aircraft shuddered as Morrison began executing the approach Marcus had suggested. Through the porthole, Marcus could see they were banking left, following the ribbon of I-76 as it curved away from downtown Denver. But even as the immediate crisis began to resolve, Marcus knew this wasn't over. Volkov hadn't spent 12 years planning this operation only to give up after the first setback. The man was brilliant, ruthless, and patient. He would have contingencies. As if summoned by Marcus's thoughts, the cargo bay intercom crackled with a new voice, accented English, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. "Hello, Marcus, did you miss me?" Dmitry Volkov had found a way back into their communication system. And he sounded very, very pleased. "You always were resourceful, my friend," Volkov's voice continued, transmitted through the aircraft's emergency communication system. Electromagnetic pulse, very dramatic, but also very temporary. Marcus felt the auxiliary controls stiffen in his hands as the remote hijack signal reestablished itself. Above him, he could hear Captain Morrison cursing as he lost primary flight control again. "I have spent 12 years studying your methods, Marcus. Every mission report, every tactical decision, every innovative solution to impossible problems. Did you think I would not anticipate the legendary creativity of Phantom 6? Through the porthole, Marcus could see they were now following I-76, but their altitude was still decreasing. Cars below looked like toys, and he could see people pulling over, pointing up at the airliner descending toward the highway. "What do you want, Dmitri?" "What I have always wanted. Justice. Retribution. The satisfaction of watching the man who destroyed my life experience the same loss I have endured." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. In the cargo bay's red emergency lighting, He could see his reflection in the porthole glass. Older now, grayer, but still recognizably, the man who had flown through hell itself to stop a nuclear weapons sale 12 years ago. Your life involved trafficking nuclear materials to terrorist organizations, Marcus said quietly. Whatever happened to you, you brought on yourself. Volkov's laugh was like breaking glass. Righteous words from a man whose daughter sits in seat 12A, trusting her father to keep her safe. Ice water ran through Marcus's veins. This is between us, Dmitri. Leave Isabella out of it. Isabella, such a beautiful name. Spanish for beautiful, is it not? The same thing that charming CIA operative mentioned 20 minutes ago. Agent Thorne has been most helpful in keeping your daughter calm during these difficult moments. The implication hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Victoria Thorne, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere, who had known things about his past that were classified beyond top secret, who had conveniently been sitting in first class when everything went wrong. Victoria works for you, Marcus whispered. Victoria works for the highest bidder, Volkov corrected. And I have been saving my money for 12 years. She has been tracking you since you boarded in Phoenix, ensuring that you and your precious daughter were exactly where I needed you to be. Through the cargo bay floor, Marcus could feel the aircraft's engines changing pitch again. They were losing altitude faster now, dropping below 5,000 feet. I-76 stretched ahead of them like a concrete river, but at their current descent rate, they would impact well short of any safe landing zone. Here are your choices, Marcus, Volkov continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who had finally cornered his prey. You can attempt another of your famous heroic interventions, in which case I will ensure this aircraft impacts downtown Denver with maximum casualties. Or you can surrender yourself to my agents at Denver International Airport, in which case I will allow the other passengers to live. And Isabella. A pause that lasted forever. Your daughter comes with me. Insurance, you understand, to ensure your continued cooperation. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Outside, Denver continued to rush toward them, 2 million people going about their lives, unaware that their fate hung in the balance of a 12-year-old vendetta. But this time, it wasn't just about saving strangers. This time, his own daughter was the price of victory. Through the intercom, he could hear Captain Morrison fighting with the controls, could sense the aircraft's descent becoming more pronounced. They had maybe 3 minutes before impact, not enough time for rescue, not enough time for alternatives. Only enough time for one last desperate gamble. Marcus reached for the helmet's communication system, switching to the encrypted military frequency. Ghost Rider, Phantom 6, I need immediate tactical assessment of Denver International Airport. Phantom 6, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that Dmitri Volkov has been planning this for 12 years, but he's forgotten one important thing about me. Marcus began working his way toward the cargo bay's forward access hatch, toward the passenger cabin where his daughter waited. What's that? I've never been very good at following orders. Marcus moved through the aircraft like a ghost, using maintenance crawlways and service passages he'd learned about in counterterrorism training decades ago. The passenger cabin was chaos, people crying, praying, staring out windows at the approaching highway. But in seat 12A, Isabella sat quietly beside Victoria Thorne, her small hand gripped tightly in the operative's manicured fingers. Victoria saw him coming and smiled, not the professional expression she'd worn before, but something sharper, more predatory. Colonel Rivera, right on schedule. Let go of my daughter. I'm afraid that's not possible. Victoria's free hand moved slightly, and Marcus saw the outline of a concealed weapon beneath her jacket. Isabella and I are going to take a little trip together, aren't we, sweetheart? Isabella looked up at her father with confusion and growing fear. Daddy, what's happening? Why won't she let go of my hand? Marcus felt rage building in his chest like steam pressure, but he forced himself to remain calm. The aircraft was still descending, still following I-76 toward what looked like an inevitable crash landing. Around him, passengers were beginning to realize that something was very wrong, that this wasn't just mechanical failure, that the woman in first class wasn't who she had claimed to be. "Victoria," Marcus said quietly, "you're making a mistake." "Am I? Dmitry Volkov is paying me $20 million for this operation. Half up front, half when I deliver you and your daughter to his people at Denver International. That seems like sound financial planning to me." Through the aircraft's windows, Marcus could see emergency vehicles beginning to line I-76, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars with flashing lights. Someone had figured out what Captain Morrison was attempting, and the authorities were preparing for an emergency highway landing. But they were still too high, still descending too fast. At their current rate, they wouldn't reach the prepared section of highway. They would impact somewhere in suburban Denver, probably taking out houses, maybe a school. Unless Marcus could find a way to regain control. "Dmitry," Marcus said, speaking to the intercom system, "I know you're listening. Here's my counteroffer." "I'm listening," Volkov's voice replied, amused. "You want me? Fine. I'll surrender myself at Denver International, but first you let this aircraft land safely. All passengers walk away, including Isabella. You are hardly in a position to negotiate, my friend." "Actually, I am." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced something that made Victoria's eyes widen. A small device with a single red button, military issue. "Deadman switch, keyed to my biometrics. If my heart stops beating, if I'm rendered unconscious, if I'm separated from this device by more than 50 feet, it transmits a signal that fries every electronic system within a half-mile radius." It was a bluff. The device was actually a GPS transponder from his old survival kit, but Volkov couldn't know that. "Including," Marcus continued, "the systems controlling this aircraft. You'll lose your remote access permanently, and Captain Morrison will regain full manual control." Through the cabin speakers, he could hear Volkov breathing, calculating, weighing options. "The problem with your plan, Dmitry, is that it relies on fear," Marcus said. "Fear that I won't sacrifice myself to save others. Fear that I've become soft, civilian, unwilling to make the hard choices." Marcus looked at his daughter, memorizing her face one more time. "But you forgot something important about Phantom 6. I never cared about my own survival. I only cared about completing the mission." He pressed the button on the fake Deadman switch. Nothing happened, of course. It was just a GPS transponder. But at the same moment, he lunged forward, grabbing Victoria's wrist and twisting until she released Isabella's hand. "Run, Mija," Marcus shouted. "Get to the back of the plane." Victoria was fast, trained, dangerous. Her weapon cleared its holster in a smooth motion, but Marcus was already moving, using the aircraft's narrow aisle and the confusion of panicking passengers as cover. The shot went wide, shattering a window and depressurizing the cabin. Oxygen masks deployed again, yellow plastic serpents dancing in the sudden wind. Through it all, Marcus could hear Volkov screaming through the intercom, could feel the aircraft beginning to respond differently as some of the remote control signals became intermittent. Maybe his bluff had worked. Maybe Volkov was afraid to risk losing control entirely. Or maybe the bastard was just getting started. The aircraft shuddered violently as competing control inputs fought for dominance. Morrison in the cockpit pulling one way, Volkov's remote system pulling another, the aircraft's automatic systems trying to find equilibrium between them. Through the chaos, Marcus saw Isabella climbing over seat backs toward the rear of the plane, her 8-year-old agility serving her well. Victoria was pursuing, but the depressurized cabin and panicking passengers were slowing her progress. "Ghost Rider Phantom 6, Marcus called through his helmet comm. which had somehow survived the electromagnetic pulse. I need options, and I need them now. Phantom 6, we've been tracking Volkov's signal. He's in a mobile command center about 6 miles south of Denver International. Military hardware, probably stolen from a foreign intelligence service. Can you take him out? Negative. He's in a civilian area and we don't have clear shot authorization. Too much risk of collateral damage. Marcus felt the familiar weight of impossible choices. Save the aircraft and its passengers, but let Volkov escape to try again another day. Or stop Volkov permanently, but risk everyone aboard the 737. Through the cabin windows, he could see I-76 approaching fast. The emergency vehicles were in position now, and the highway had been cleared of civilian traffic for several miles. If Captain Morrison could regain full control in the next 60 seconds, they might actually pull off a successful emergency landing. But Victoria was still moving through the cabin, still hunting Isabella. And somewhere in the Denver metro area, Dmitry Volkov was preparing his next move. That's when Marcus heard something that changed everything. Isabella's voice, small but clear, coming through the aircraft's intercom system. "Excuse me," she said politely, as if she were asking to be excused from dinner. "This is Isabella Rivera in the back of the plane. I think I found something important." Marcus felt his heart stop. His daughter was 8 years old, terrified, running from armed operatives, and she was broadcasting to everyone on the aircraft. "There's a box back here with lots of buttons and wires," Isabella continued. "And there's a man's voice coming out of it, saying bad words in a funny accent." Volkov's mobile command center was transmitting through a relay device hidden somewhere in the aircraft's cargo hold. Isabella had found the relay. "Daddy," Isabella's voice continued over the intercom, "should I press the big red button? It says emergency stop right next to it." Through the cabin speakers, Marcus could hear Volkov screaming "no" in 3 different languages. Marcus smiled for the first time in 12 years. His daughter had just found the kill switch for Volkov's remote control system. "Press it, Mija," Marcus said quietly. "Press it now." The change was immediate and dramatic. The aircraft's nose came.